A lonely billionaire thought he had everything, but it took a stranger's hug to show him what his daughter truly needed. He had everything the world could offer. A huge mansion with shining marble floors, expensive cars parked in long rows, a business empire that made him one of the richest men in the city. To outsiders, his life looked perfect, like a dream. People could only imagine. But behind the golden walls of his world, there was silence. The kind of silence that reminded him every day of what he had lost. Years ago, his wife had passed away suddenly, leaving him with their only daughter. She was very young at that time, too young to understand why her mother never came back home. The man promised himself that he would raise her the best way he could. He hired the best nannies, tutors, and caregivers, wanting to make sure she had everything she needed. But no matter how many people he hired, there was still something missing. Mother's touch. A mother's hug, the kind of gentle care no one else could give. The little girl was growing up fast. Though she had toys, clothes, and every comfort a child could imagine, she always carried a sadness in her eyes. She often asked about her mom, sometimes at night when the house felt too big and empty. The father tried to answer her questions with patience, telling her stories about how kind and beautiful her mother was. But every time, his heart broke a little more. He was a man who could sign million-dollar deals without blinking, but when his daughter asked, "Why can't I see Mommy again?" he had no answer. He worked long hours, as his business demanded his attention. There were endless meetings, phone calls, and decisions only he could make. Sometimes he came home late at night, finding his daughter already asleep with her toys scattered on the bed. He would sit beside her quietly, brushing her hair from her face, feeling the weight of guilt. He told himself that he was doing all of this for her future, for her comfort. But deep down, he knew she needed something far greater than luxury. She needed him. She needed love that was not distracted, not busy, not absent. One Saturday morning, he woke up earlier than usual. His daughter was sitting on the living room floor, drawing on a piece of paper. She looked up at him with a bright smile and said, "Daddy, can we go out today? Just you and me?" He hesitated at first, thinking of the work emails waiting for him, but something in her eyes made him pause. He nodded slowly and told her to get ready. He decided they wouldn't go to any fancy place that day. No private clubs, no five-star restaurants. Instead, he wanted to give her something ordinary, something simple. He remembered passing by a small diner not too far from his office. It was nothing special, just a regular place where ordinary families sat together, laughed, and shared meals. Maybe it would be different for her. Maybe it would make her feel like life was more than marble floors and private chefs. The little girl was excited as they drove through the city. In his luxury car, she pressed her small hands against the window, watching people on the sidewalks, pointing at children eating ice cream with their parents, and asking endless questions about everything she saw. For once, the man wasn't annoyed by the questions. Instead, he found himself smiling, realizing how curious and full of life she really was. When they arrived at the diner, he felt slightly uncomfortable. The place was nothing like what he was used to. The tables were wooden and a little scratched. The lights were warm but not glamorous, and the smell of fried food filled the air. Yet, there was something comforting about it. Families sat together, talking loudly, sharing laughter, and eating with joy. He looked at his daughter, who was staring around with wide eyes, and he knew he had made the right choice. They sat down. At a corner booth, his daughter climbed onto the seat, looking around as if she had stepped into another world. The waitress came over with a kind smile, handing them menus. She treated them no differently than anyone else, not recognizing who he was or how wealthy he might be. For once, he felt invisible, just a father sitting with his daughter. And strangely, it felt good. While he glanced at the menu, his phone buzzed with notifications. He tried to ignore it, but the habit was strong. He picked it up, scanning through. Work messages, lost in business, even at the table. His daughter, meanwhile, was looking at the pictures on the menu, her face lighting up at the thought of pancakes with syrup. She tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, can we get this?" He looked at her quickly, nodded absent-mindedly, and went back to his phone. The waitress noticed. She saw the little girl's hopeful eyes and the father's distracted glance. She knelt down beside the girl, asking her gently what she wanted to eat. The girl smiled shyly and pointed at the pancakes, her voice soft but happy. The waitress wrote it down, gave her a wink, and told her she had made an excellent choice. The girl giggled, and the father finally looked up, realizing how his daughter was already forming a small connection with this stranger as they waited for the food. The father put his phone down and forced himself to focus on her. She was humming softly, swinging her little legs under the table, telling him about a drawing she had made that morning. She said it was a picture of their family, her daddy, and her mommy. She added that she always drew her mom even. Though she couldn't remember exactly what she looked like, father felt his chest tighten. He didn't want to cry in front of her. So he smiled and told her mommy would have loved her drawing. When the food arrived, the little girl clapped, her hands in excitement. The pancakes were fluffy and sweet, and she ate them with joy, syrup dripping onto her hands. The waitress came by to check on them, chatting casually with the girl, asking about school and her favorite games. The father watched silently, noticing how his daughter's face glowed as she talked to this woman like she had known her forever at one point. The girl leaned closer to the waitress and whispered something. The father didn't hear at first, but when the waitress froze slightly and then gently hugged the girl, he understood enough. His daughter had asked her something that came from the deepest place in her heart. Something about wanting a mommy, about wishing for a hug that only a mother could give. The father sat there quietly, watching the scene unfold. His daughter's small arms wrapped around the waitress's neck, her eyes closed, holding on as if she never wanted to let go. The waitress stroked her hair softly, her expression full of compassion. For a moment, time stopped. The father, a man who had always been in control, always powerful, felt a wave of helplessness. He had never seen his daughter cling to anyone like that before. That single moment pierced him deeper than anything in his life. Deals, money, power, none of it mattered compared to the sight of his child searching for something he couldn't provide. He stared at the table, fighting back tears, wondering how he had let things reach this point, and that was the beginning. The small moment in a quiet diner where a billionaire father realized that his daughter's happiness wasn't hidden in his fortune. It was hidden in something he could not buy, something he hadn't been giving enough of. It was hidden in love, presence, and the kind of warmth he hadn't known how to give since his wife had died. The diner was not a place of riches, but it had something warm inside it. The little girl looked around with wide eyes, enjoying the laughter of families at other tables, the smell of fresh food, and the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. Oh, she was smiling, and that smile was rare these days. Her father noticed, but he was still distracted, staring at his phone again, reading business messages that never seemed to stop. The waitress came back to their table, holding a tray of drinks. She placed a glass of orange juice in front of the girl and water in front of the father. She looked at the little girl with a gentle smile, the kind that came from the heart. "How's your day, sweetheart?" she asked kindly. The girl's face lit up, and she answered with excitement, telling her how she had drawn a picture that morning and how she was now out with her dad. The father glanced at them briefly, then returned to scrolling on his phone. His daughter didn't seem to mind. She was too happy to have someone listening to her. The waitress leaned in, showing interest in every word the little girl said. She asked her about school, her favorite colors, and even what she liked to eat the most. The girl answered each question with energy, giggling when the waitress made silly faces. When the father finally put his phone down, he noticed something. His daughter's body language was different. She wasn't just talking, she was opening up. Her shoulders were relaxed, her voice was louder, and her smile stretched wider. It struck him that she didn't behave this way often, not even with him. She seemed so comfortable with this woman, as though she had been waiting for someone to listen to her without being in a rush. As the father watched, the girl leaned closer to the waitress and spoke softly. "I don't have a mommy," she whispered, almost shyly. The waitress blinked in surprise, her heart squeezing. She looked at the girl carefully and asked in a soft tone, "Oh, honey, is that why you look so sad sometimes?" The girl nodded, her little eyes turning shiny with unshed tears. The father's hands froze on the table. He had not expected his daughter to say this out loud, especially to a stranger. He felt his throat tighten, but before he could say anything, the waitress did something unexpected. She reached out slowly as if asking for permission, and the girl moved into her arms. The waitress hugged her gently, wrapping the child against her chest. The girl clung to her like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life, her tiny arms squeezed tightly, her cheek pressed against the waitress's shoulder. She didn't let go quickly. She stayed there, taking in the warmth of a hug that reminded her of something she had been missing for so long. The father felt his heart shatter. He had given his daughter everything: clothes, toys, trips, lessons, but he had never been able to give her this: a mother's hug. The sight of his daughter holding on to the waitress made him feel powerless. It was like watching a truth he had ignored for too long come alive right in front of him. The waitress stroked the girl's hair softly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't speak much. She just held her with quiet understanding. After a while, she whispered, "Sweetheart, your daddy loves you so much. You're very lucky to have him." The girl pulled back slightly, her eyes wet but shining. She smiled at the waitress and said, "But sometimes I wish I had a mommy to hug." The words pierced the father deeper than anything in his life. He lowered his gaze, pretending to look at the table, but inside he felt broken. He had worked so hard to protect her from pain, but she was still carrying it. She was still longing for something he couldn't give. The waitress looked at the father then. Their eyes met, and for a moment she seemed to see straight into his soul. She didn't judge him, but her expression was full of quiet understanding. She gave a small nod, as if telling him that she understood his pain as well. Then she turned back to the girl, smiling again, making light conversation to ease the heaviness. The girl laughed again soon after, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She asked the waitress silly questions, like what her favorite ice cream flavor was, and whether she liked cartoons. The waitress answered with the same energy, making her laugh even harder. The father just sat there watching, unable to believe how quickly his daughter's sadness had turned into joy because of one woman's kindness. He thought about all the times he had tried to distract his daughter with gifts. He had bought her dolls, dresses, even a pony. He had taken her on trips, thinking new places would make her forget. But nothing had ever filled the empty space in her heart. And here, in this small diner, a stranger had done more in 10 minutes than he had managed in years. When their food arrived, the girl invited the waitress to sit with them, her innocent eyes full of hope. The waitress laughed softly and told her she had to work, but promised to check on her again soon. The girl nodded happily, as if satisfied with that answer. The father picked up his fork, but found he couldn't eat. His chest felt heavy, and his throat burned. He stared at his daughter, cutting her pancakes, humming happily, and he wondered how he had missed all of this. She had been starving not for food or toys, but for warmth, for someone to notice her, to give her time to show her love that wasn't distracted. He leaned back against the booth, his mind spinning. He had always thought he was doing enough by providing. But the truth was in front of him. Money could not replace what she had lost. He could not buy a hug, he could not buy comfort, and he could not buy a mother's love. The little girl looked up then, her mouth full of pancake, and said, "Daddy, I like it here. Can we come again?" He forced a smile and nodded, his eyes glassy. She didn't notice the pain in his expression. She was too busy enjoying her meal. But the waitress noticed. As she passed by carrying another tray, she caught the father's eyes again. This time, she didn't smile. She gave him a look full of quiet sympathy. It's almost like she wanted to tell him that it wasn't too late. And for the first time in a long time, billionaire father felt like the walls he had built around himself were starting to crack. The father sat still, his fork resting on the edge of his plate, his mind far away from the busy diner around him. His daughter was happily chewing her food, sometimes giggling to herself as she thought of something funny the waitress had said. But he could not enjoy any of it. His heart was too heavy. The image of his little girl hugging a stranger as if she were her mother replayed in his head again and again. It was not the waitress's fault. She had only shown kindness. The pain came from the truth behind it. His daughter was longing for a love he could never replace, no matter how hard he tried. He excused himself quietly, telling his daughter he would be back in a moment. She nodded, too busy with her pancakes to ask questions. He walked quickly through the diner, pushing open the restroom door and leaning against the sink. The mirror in front of him showed a man everyone else admired, a successful businessman, well-dressed, powerful. But he didn't see that man anymore. He saw a father who was failing. His chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, tears spilled down his face. He gripped the sink, his knuckles white, and let out a shaky breath. He thought about the day his wife had died, the way everything had changed in one moment. Back then, he had promised himself that he would protect their daughter, that he would be both mother and father for her. He had worked harder than ever, believing success would shield her from pain. But what had it all done? It had only built walls between them. She had wealth, but she was lonely. She had comfort, but not warmth. She had him, but she did not truly feel him. He remembered the way she had whispered to the waitress, how she had clung to her as if she had finally found what she had been missing. That memory cut deeper than any business loss, deeper than any insult or failure in his career. He was not afraid of losing money or power. He was afraid of losing his daughters. He splashed water on his face, trying to steady himself, but the tears did not stop easily. He had hidden his pain for years, staying strong for her, never allowing himself to cry. But in that restroom alone, he finally broke down. He whispered to himself, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," as if speaking to both his daughter and his late wife. When he returned to the table, his eyes were still red, though he tried to hide it. The little girl looked up at him innocently, unaware of the storm inside him. She smiled and told him about the syrup making her hands sticky. He nodded and smiled weakly, his voice soft as he helped her clean up. He thought he had covered his sadness well, but the waitress noticed. She walked over slowly, carrying a fresh jug of coffee for another table, and paused near them. She leaned slightly toward him and spoke in a quiet voice, so only he could hear. "She's a special girl. All she needs is you, not all the other things." Words were simple, but they struck him like lightning. He looked at her, surprised that she could see through him so easily. He wanted to deny it, to explain that he was doing his best, that he was giving his daughter everything she could ever want. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down he knew she was right. His hands trembled slightly as he put them on the table. He lowered his head and whispered back, "I don't know if I'm enough. I try, but I feel like I'm failing her." His voice cracked, the weight of years of guilt pressing down on him. He had never admitted this out loud, not to anyone, not even to himself. The waitress's expression softened. She knelt slightly so she could look at him at eye level. "You're not failing her," she said gently. "She just wants you. Be with her. That's all she needs." He stared at her, stunned by the kindness in her tone. She wasn't pitying him. She wasn't criticizing him. She was reminding him of something he had forgotten in his chase for success. Presence mattered more than presence. Time mattered more than money. Love mattered more than all the riches in the world. His daughter looked at him then, her mouth still full of food, and said cheerfully, "Daddy, when we go home, can you play a game with me? Just us." Her innocent request, spoken without knowing the impact it carried, made his eyes sting again. He nodded quickly, smiling even as his throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered. "I promise." The waitress placed a gentle hand on the table, her eyes full of encouragement. She didn't say more, but he felt her words echoing. Inside him, realized, he didn't need to carry the burden of being perfect. He only needed to show up, to listen, to hold his daughter when she needed him, to let her know she wasn't alone. For the rest of the meal, he stayed off his phone. He listened to his daughter's stories, her little jokes, her excitement about simple things like pancakes and cartoons. Every word was a reminder of what he had been missing while buried in work. He laughed with her, genuinely laughed, something he hadn't done in a long time. But deep inside, he knew he had reached a breaking point. The tears in the restroom, the sight of his daughter hugging the waitress, the kind but honest words he had just heard, everything had pushed him to see the truth. He could not keep living like this, thinking money could heal what was broken. He had to change. When they stood to leave, the little girl ran ahead toward the door, her laughter filling the diner. The waitress gave him one last look, a small smile of reassurance, as if telling him silently, "You can do this." He nodded back, grateful for her kindness. As he walked out into the bright sunlight with his daughter holding his hand, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about meetings or profits. He was thinking about bedtime stories, walks in the park, and the small moments that truly mattered. He squeezed his daughter's hand gently, and she squeezed back, her face glowing with joy, and in that simple exchange, he understood that this was the beginning of something new. He didn't know how to fix everything overnight, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would never again let his daughter feel like she had to find love in a stranger's arms. The next days felt different for the billionaire father. Something inside him had shifted after that visit to the diner. He kept remembering the way his daughter had hugged the waitress, the way she had laughed so freely while talking to her, and the way her small arms had clung as if she never wanted to let go. That image haunted him, but it also gave him a new kind of strength. He knew he had to change. He could not go back to the life where his phone and business came first. His daughter needed him in a way money could never fill, so he started small. The very next weekend, instead of spending hours locked in his study or attending endless meetings, he asked his daughter what she wanted to do. Her face lit up instantly. She told him she wanted to go back to the diner again. He hesitated for a moment, not because he didn't want to, but because he wondered if it was strange to return so soon. But when he saw the hope in her eyes, he smiled and agreed. They drove back to the little diner, and as soon as they walked in, the girl's face glowed with excitement. The waitress recognized them immediately. She smiled warmly and waved at the girl, who ran up to her as though greeting an old friend. The father watched quietly, a strange mixture of emotions swirling inside him. He was grateful for the happiness his daughter felt, but he also felt humbled. It was clear that what he had been missing all these years was not something expensive or complicated. It was human connection. They sat down at the same booth, and the waitress came over with menus. But before she could speak, the little girl proudly told her, "I want pancakes again." The waitress laughed, nodding, and said she would bring them right away. The father ordered something simple for himself, though he barely cared about the food. What mattered to him was watching his daughter come alive in this place. As they ate, the little girl kept calling the waitress over, showing her drawings she had made in a small notebook she carried. The waitress took the time to look at each one, praising her, asking questions, and encouraging her to draw more. The girl glowed under the attention, smiling so wide her cheeks turned pink. The father sat back, watching in silence. He realized his daughter had found comfort in this woman, and it didn't make him jealous. It made him grateful. Over the next few weeks, this became a routine. Every few days, he would take his daughter to the diner. The waitress began to know their names, and soon she was no longer just a stranger serving food. She became a familiar presence, someone who made the girl feel safe and noticed. The father didn't fully understand why his daughter had connected so strongly with her, but he didn't question it. He only knew that his daughter's laughter had returned, and her eyes sparkled more often than before. At home, the father also began to change. He started putting his phone away during dinner. He spent evenings playing games with his daughter, listening to her stories, and even helping her with her drawings. At first it felt awkward. He wasn't used to slowing down to sitting on the floor and coloring, or to listening without glancing at emails. But slowly, he began to enjoy it. He began to see the joy in her eyes every time he gave her his full attention. One evening, as they drove back from the diner, the girl suddenly said, "Daddy, you smile more now? I like it." Her simple words struck him deeply. Glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing her small face glowing with honesty. He realized she wasn't just happier because of the waitress, she was happier because he was finally present. Still, he couldn't forget the kindness of the waitress. He had noticed small things about her too. She often looked tired, her uniform a little worn. There were days when her smile didn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. Once, when his daughter asked her why she wasn't at home with her children, The waitress laughed softly and explained that she had only one little boy, and she worked hard so he could have what he needed. That answer stayed in the father's mind. He learned more about her over time. She was a single mother, raising her son while working 2 jobs. She didn't complain, but he could see the struggle in the way she moved quickly from table to table. Always on her feet, always smiling, even when she was clearly tired. He admired her strength, and he felt something inside him soften every time he thought about her life. One afternoon, after paying the bill, he quietly slipped an extra amount of money into the tip jar, much more than the usual. The waitress noticed, shaking her head with a polite but firm smile. "Sir, I appreciate it, but I can't accept that much," she said. He tried to insist, but she refused gently. "I'm not helping your daughter for money," she explained. "She's a sweet child. She deserves kindness." Her words humbled him even more. He was a man who was used to solving problems with money. If someone needed something, he bought it. If something was broken, he paid to fix it. But this woman was showing him that not everything could be bought, and not every act of kindness came with a price tag. His daughter, of course, didn't notice these silent exchanges. She only knew that she loved coming to the diner, talking to the waitress, and feeling seen. She would chatter endlessly in the car on the way home, telling her father how funny the waitress was, or how she wanted to draw her a picture next time. The father listened carefully, no longer lost in his own world, and promised to bring her again soon. The bond between the little girl and the waitress grew naturally, like sunlight filling a room without anyone noticing at first. The father watched, and while part of him still felt a pang of sadness that his daughter had needed someone else to fill that role, another part of him felt thankful. Thankful that in a world full of people who looked the other way, there was someone who cared enough to stop, to listen, to hug a lonely little girl who missed her mom. One evening, when the diner was less busy, the father finally gathered the courage to speak more openly with the waitress. His daughter had gone to the restroom, and for a moment, it was just the 2 of them. He looked at her and said softly, "Thank you for what you've done for her." "I don't think you realize how much it means," the waitress smiled, shaking her head slightly. "You don't have to thank me. Gosh, she's a wonderful child. She just needed someone to listen." He swallowed, his voice low. "I didn't realize how much she was hurting. I thought I was doing everything right, but I was blind. I owe you more than you know." The waitress looked at him with kind eyes. "You don't owe me anything. Just keep doing what you're doing now. Be with her. That's what she needs most." His daughter returned just then, holding his hand and pulling him out of the heavy moment. But as they left the diner that night, he felt something different in his heart. Gratitude not only toward the woman who had shown such kindness, but also toward life itself for giving him a chance to start over with his daughter. He knew he could never bring his wife back. He knew he could never erase the years of loneliness his daughter had felt. But he also knew that the future could be brighter. And for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. The seasons slowly changed, and with them, the father's life changed too. The house that once felt cold and silent now carried the sound of laughter and little footsteps running through the halls. The man who had once been buried under endless phone calls and business meetings was now learning to slow down. He still worked. Of course, his empire demanded it, but he had drawn new lines for himself. Evenings were for his daughter. Weekends were for her too. For the first time in years, he was not just providing for her, he was being there with her. The little girl blossomed under this new attention. She smiled more, laughed louder, and asked for bedtime stories every night. She wanted to play games, bake cookies, and draw pictures with him. Each small moment reminded him that he hadn't lost everything, still had the most important part of his life, her. And now he was finally beginning to give her what she had been longing for all along. The diner remained a special place. For both of them, they visited often, sometimes once a week, sometimes more. Every time the little girl would run inside excitedly, searching for the familiar face of the waitress who had hugged her that first day. Their bond had only grown stronger. The girl would bring drawings she had made at home, proudly giving them to the waitress who accepted them with genuine joy. In return, the waitress sometimes gave her little treats from the kitchen, a cookie, a piece of pie, or a cup of hot chocolate, with extra whipped cream. The child treasured these small gestures as if they were priceless gifts. The father watched this friendship with quiet gratitude. He no longer felt the sting of jealousy he once had. Instead, he understood now that kindness could come from unexpected places. He had once believed his wealth was the only shield his daughter needed, but now he knew better. What had healed her heart wasn't his money, it was love, attention, and human warmth. Things money could never buy. He often thought about his late wife, wondering what she would think if she could see them now. He imagined her smiling at their daughter's laughter, proud of how strong she had grown. He imagined her looking at him too, nodding with approval that he had finally learned to be the father their daughter needed. Sometimes, late at night, he whispered a quiet thank you to her, believing that maybe she had guided them to that diner, to that waitress, to that moment of truth. The waitress, too, became more than just someone who served them food. She became a part of their lives in small but meaningful ways. On days when the father was busy but still brought his daughter to the diner, she would take extra time to sit with the little girl, listening to her endless stories. She became a friend, not just to the child, but slowly to the father as well. They shared small conversations about life, about parenting, about struggles. He admired her strength, how she worked so hard, not for herself, but for her son. She reminded him that love did not need riches to exist. One evening, as they sat in their usual booth, the little girl hugged the waitress tightly before leaving. The father watched quietly, and instead of the sharp pain he had once felt, he felt peace. This time, he did not see the hug as a reminder of what was missing. He saw it as a symbol of healing. His daughter was no longer crying for her mother every night. She was no longer carrying silent sadness in her eyes. She was laughing, she was glowing, and she was happy again. That was what mattered most. As they walked out of the diner into the evening air, the father bent down and lifted his daughter into his arms. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Daddy, I love coming here," she said softly. "But I love it even more when you play with me at home." Her words made him smile. He realized then that the waitress had given him a gift to not just comfort for his daughter, but a reminder of what truly mattered in his role as a father. In the months that followed, he continued to change. He reduced his long business trips. He allowed his managers to handle smaller matters, while he focused on what could not be replaced: time with his child. They went on simple outings together, not always to luxurious places, but to parks, small cafes, even just walks in the neighborhood. He found joy in these ordinary moments, joy he had overlooked for years. The little girl often talked about her mommy less and less. It wasn't because she had forgotten her. It was because her heart had finally found peace. She knew her father was there, fully there, and she no longer felt the empty space so strongly. Sometimes she still asked questions, and he still answered with tenderness, but she no longer cried about it the way she once did. She had learned that even though her mother was gone, she was still surrounded by love. The father felt lighter too. For years he had carried guilt like a shadow. He had believed he was failing, that he could never be enough. But now he was beginning to understand he did not need to be perfect. He only needed to be present. His daughter didn't want his wealth. She wanted his time, his attention, his love. And those were things he could give freely. One day, as they were leaving the diner again, he paused at the door and turned to look back. His daughter had just hugged the waitress goodbye, her laughter filling the room. The father's eyes softened. For a moment, he thought of his late wife again. In his heart, he whispered, "Thank you for sending someone to remind me what matters." The little girl tugged on his sleeve, calling, "Daddy, let's go home." He smiled and took her hand. As they stepped outside, he felt something he had not felt in years, a deep sense of peace. He knew life would never be perfect. There would still be challenges. There would still be moments of sadness. But now he also knew that he was strong enough to face them, as long as he held on to the love he had for his daughter. Money could build houses and buy cars, but it could never replace the sound of her laughter or the warmth of her small hand in his. And so, The story did not end with riches or power. It ended with something far greater: a father learning to be present, a daughter learning she was truly loved, and a stranger's kindness reminding them both of the simple truth that love is the most valuable thing in the world. That night, as the father tucked his daughter into bed, she hugged him tightly and whispered, "Daddy, you're the best." Tears filled his eyes, but this time they were not tears of guilt. They were tears of gratitude. He kissed her forehead and whispered back, "No, sweetheart, you're the best thing that ever happened to me." And as she drifted off to sleep, he sat by her side, knowing he would never again let her feel alone.